The Third Reich's conquest of European countries was truly rapid. Nazi German soldiers broke into the capitals of neighboring countries and behaved as masters. Naturally, this permissiveness could not help but affect the personal side as well. The Nazis, most of them young, strong men, saw nothing wrong with spending the night with a woman they liked. They were not at all concerned about what consequences their actions would have on the chosen women later on. And as it turned out, fate was preparing the unfortunate girls for the most severe challenges. And it was in the post-war period that they were subjected to them. In France. France rightly ranks first in terms of the number of women who had links with the Nazis. After its defeat, impressive garrisons were stationed on its territory, whose soldiers almost immediately rushed to all the nearby brothels. There were more than 30 of those brothels in the Paris suburbs alone. The Nazi German command officially tried to curb the promiscuity of its personnel in the brothels, but in fact, more and more French women were greeting the dawn in German embrace every day. But not all Nazi Germans sought love in brothels. Sometimes, relationships were struck up with simply ordinary French women. Of course, not all women went to bed with the invaders just because they wanted physical intimacy. Many women were trying to get food for themselves and their families in this way. They genuinely thought it was shameful, but they did it in the name of saving their loved ones. The French resistance members distributed leaflets among the population with the following text: "French women who surrender to the Germans will have their hair cut off completely. We will write on your back, sold to the Germans." When young French women sell their bodies to the Gestapo or the militia, they are selling the blood and soul of their French countrymen. Future wives and mothers are obliged to keep their purity for the love of their homeland. However, after victory, no moral or material hardship that prompted a woman to spend the night with a Nazi was considered a mitigating circumstance at all. Such women were clearly recognized as criminals, traitors to their homeland, and were subjected to cruel punishments. Sometimes they were even punished without trial. People with guns in their hands broke into houses and pulled women out by force, took them to the town square and cut their hair off. The women were held by the arms so that they would not resist. The barber, called in to do his patriotic duty, wielded scissors or a shearing machine. The punishment and humiliation were all the more severe because they were done in public, in front of relatives, neighbors, and acquaintances. Those assembled laughed and applauded. The disgraced women were then taken through the streets for all to see. Sometimes the women's clothes were torn off. The boys hooted. According to various estimates, more than 20,000 women were subjected to abuse. It was not uncommon for the new provincial authorities, eager to show their zeal to the government, to subject innocent people to execution. At that time, sometimes a slander or an unsubstantiated suspicion was pretty much enough. In France, it is believed that French women gave birth to 200,000 babies from Germans, of whom 80,000 were officially registered with German paternity. This is what the German archives say. The French were more sympathetic to the children than to their mothers. Measures were limited to forbidding them to learn the German language and to wear German names. Of course, not all of them were able to avoid attacks by peers and adults. In addition, many of these babies were abandoned by their mothers and raised in orphanages. By the way, we have to mention one fact, that since 2009, there has been a law in Germany under which children born in France to Wehrmacht soldiers can obtain German citizenship. Norwegian justice. After the deliverance from the Nazis, the Norwegian authorities began to persecute former mistresses of Nazis with no less zeal than the French, and the latter were punished more severely than the French women. They were given real sentences during which they were sent to hard forced labor. These sentences were as long as 5 years. As it happens sometimes, after an intimate relationship a woman becomes pregnant, and women from the occupied territories were no exception. In the Scandinavian kingdom in particular, over 7,000 children were born to Germans. Their fate was unenviable. When their mothers were sentenced and placed in correctional institutions, the children were sent to special orphanages. It was often the case that their names were changed in these institutions so that the women who gave birth to them would not be able to find them after their prison terms were over. Sometimes, however, the Norwegian women showed persistence, and despite the obstacles, they found their children and demanded their return. But then the ruthless justice mechanism came into play, which always turned out not to be on the side of the unfortunates. It was completely unrealistic to regain parental rights. The judges stated directly that they would never allow it and hinted that the best way out was to give up the child. Some retreated, not having the strength to resist, but some continued to fight. However, their efforts were also unsuccessful. Moreover, new cases were filed against the poor women. Plus, they were often involved in medical examinations, where doctors made the right diagnosis, recognizing them insane and often locking them in mental hospitals for a long time, and sometimes for life. In general, Norway was harsher on these women than anywhere else. Sometimes it seemed that they were considered nearly the most important traitors, worse even than those who had openly taken the side of fascism and fought against their own people. Not only were they morally broken by their sentences, but there was an unspoken tendency on the part of the government to forget them completely. The aim was to erase the unfortunates from the history of the kingdom, because it was urgent to restore the image of the country, which with all its might had participated in the fight against the fascist invaders. And it had no traitors in its ranks. It is clear that women who had slept with the Nazi Germans, let alone given birth to their children, did not fit into this picture. The fate of women in the Netherlands and Poland. In the Netherlands, the punishments inflicted on the women were similar to those in France, or in other words, disgrace. They were placed on their knees in the dung, their hair were shaved, and their heads were dyed orange. Nor could the common people be expected to take it easy. The villagers cursed them, tried to humiliate and oppress them in every way, and the children were constantly punished and told at every opportunity that their mothers were traitors. Often the only salvation was a change of residence. Women left their homes, taking only their children and a few belongings. It was difficult to sell any property, again, due to the inflated public negativity. Bank officials also tried not to lend them any money. But it was Polish women who drew the Nazi occupiers' closest attention. Among the Nazi German commanders, there were advocates of the theory, such as Heinrich Himmler himself, that the Poles as a nation were the closest to the German nation. This led to the fact that during the war, there was a strict selection among the Polish women. They were divided into those who belonged more to the Slavic race and to the Aryan race. With the help of the latter, according to Himmler, it was possible to increase the number of members of the superior race. A huge amount of women were raped in this way and gave birth to children afterwards. Thank you for watching and subscribe for new videos.